We've talked quite a lot about action in the event so far, but this next session is half an hour. It's our action session. If I can ask our speakers, Liz and Maireann, to come up, please. Is Liz around? Yes, Liz. So this is a session which we've called Making It Real. So this is some things about companies, how they behave and how employees behave. Now, I have to say, just as by way of background, and I've got them both printed out here, there are a couple of, if you like, manifestos, action points, which may be referred to in this session. One is the Declaration of Amsterdam. A call to action there goes back to 2011, put together by the Workplace Pride Foundation. That's 10. Manifesto of 10. Is it 10, David, isn't it? I'm just going to count. Yeah, it's 10 points on that one. And then EY, formerly Ernst & Young, they had a Making It Real, their own little manifesto based on a piece of a global study in which they had spoken to many employers and others. And they had come with eight action points. So there's kind of 8 or 10. There's quite a lot of coincidence between the action points of the two. But what I want to do is, we've got two speakers. Maireann, you heard from earlier, Maireann Pijnenburg, Business Development Executive for Workplace Diversity and LGBT Markets at IBM. So Maireann, you heard from at the beginning. But also we've now got Liz Bingham here, who is a partner at EY. She's also, by the way, president of R3, which is an industry body for restructuring professionals, the people who go in and restructure businesses, but that's a different story. Liz, I'm going to ask Liz to give us a little presentation, talk us through Making It Real, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion about turning all the thoughts that we've had into action points. But Liz.
Thanks, Evan. I'll stand up if I may so I can see all of you. I just want to share a few stories with you, if I may, to hopefully bring to life why we at EY think this is an absolutely fundamental business imperative that Claudia and other speakers have talked about already today. Firstly, my own story. I've been with the firm 30 years. I know it doesn't look like it. It probably does to the front row. And I think about my career in 3 parts. My straight career, my in-the-closet career, and then my post-coming-out career. And like one of our earlier speakers, I realized I was gay quite late on. In fact, I was 30 years old when I fell in love with a woman for the first time. Up until that point, I'd had a really successful career. And then this shocking event happened. And shocking because when I tell you I was 30 in 1992, this was a period in time where there were no gay role models. We didn't have gay economics editors presenting Newsnight on the BBC. We didn't have lesbian news presenters on the BBC, which we do now. There was really nobody in society, let alone business, that was a good gay role model. And in fact, at the time, and many of you are too young to remember this, but Elton John was married to a woman. So it was a really, really difficult period, and I certainly thought that this was going to have a catastrophic effect on my career. So I was in this dichotomy of being incredibly happy in my personal life, but incredibly depressed in my business life. And my career started to derail because I was in the closet for 2 years. And I felt this crushing weight of fear and this crushing of my ability, my passion, my energy, and my commitment. All of my mojo, everything that I had applied to my career up until that point just disappeared. And I was encouraged by my boss to come out. This was 8 years before I came out to my parents. And 2 things happened. Firstly, the fear went away. And secondly, I got the power into the right place, which was in my hands, not in the hands of people who might have been my detractors. And my career accelerated from that point on. And during this period, when I was now an out lesbian in the workplace, we hired a really talented guy from industry into our business. And he made partner really quickly. He was a brilliant guy. He'd been married, he had a young daughter, married to a woman, but was gay, but was firmly in the closet. He was in the closet in most of his personal life, as well as in his work life, because he was fearful that his wife would take his daughter away if she discovered that he was in fact gay. And there was no way that he was going to tell the bosses at work that he was gay. And my sincerest regret is that I was never able to persuade him that actually the sun was going to be shining brighter on the other side if he did come out. Because what I observed in 7 years was his behavior deteriorate, because he was putting himself under so much pressure to hide who he was. His performance went off. He ended up having a breakdown and ended up leaving the firm with his reputation not in a good place. And I contrast that with a young graduate that contacted me a few years ago. As some of my colleagues think that it's my generation's problem, this whole gay thing. But 63% of graduates who are out at university go back into the closet when they come into the workplace. So there's something going on in our businesses that is causing this phenomena. And this young graduate who had heard me speak and tell my coming out story wrote to me and said that he had just come out to himself. And he was terrified, or had been terrified, of being found out at work, that bad things were going to happen. But after he'd heard me speak, he'd had the courage to come out to a couple of his colleagues who were amazing and supportive and kind and generous. So he came out to a few more, and a few more after that. And he's now embarked on a journey, this young man, of telling his family. He hasn't got to his parents yet, but he's told his aunt, he's told his grandparents, and his parents will come in time. And during this period, this young man has been elected to our employee council by his peers. He won an award as being Young Accountant of the Year in the UK, with thousands and thousands of people in that competition. He's received values awards, he's been promoted. And I genuinely believe that none of that would have happened for him if he hadn't felt confident to come out in the workplace. And one final note, and this has been touched on, and Evans mentioned it several times, in terms of attracting talent. I was approached by a young graduate 2 years ago who came up to me at the end of one of our big graduate welcome events. And he's a young Pakistani gay man. He had received a first-class degree in physics from Cambridge University. So I think on any measure, you'd have to say this guy is talent. And he said that he'd always wanted a career in professional services, but that he hadn't even considered applying to any of our competitors. He had only applied to us because we'd won the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index a couple of years ago. And he knew that as a gay Pakistani man, he would have the best opportunity to succeed in our environment than any of our competitors.
Thank you very much indeed. Liz, just tell us a little about this making it real thing, EY. So this is a piece of work, though, that came up with 8 action points. I'm not going to read them all out, but it's, you know, number 1, conduct an opportunity and risk assessment and identify priorities for action. Make the case for business diversity, set policy globally, calibrate locally, which gets to the point we heard about earlier of not every country you're working in has the same cultural, legal, or attitudinal views that everywhere else does. Build unified global LGBT networks. Just tell us a little bit about that work, how important it is.
Well, it arose. It might be interesting just to understand a little bit of how it arose. So I think there's a perception that this is a very Anglo-American topic. And certainly within our organization, it was seen as such. And then a few years ago in St. Petersburg, there was the CIS equivalent of Davos, which we were headline sponsors for. And this was at the time that Putin had announced that, you know, bad things were going to happen to gay folk. And the reaction and the response from across our global organization, from LGBT staff as well as from straight staff, was very striking. It said, well, what are you going to do? What decisions are you going to make? How do you justify continuing to be headline sponsor of an event like that with that kind of attitude in country when all of our declarations are about inclusion? And this brought into really stark relief for us that as global employers, this is a really, really tricky topic. And, you know, we started off by saying, we don't even understand, we don't even have a roadmap that helps us or our colleagues to understand what illegal actually means in all of these different countries. So that's, you know, kind of the first point is like, let's understand what that actually means. And then, you know, we need to figure out, well, what does that mean for our folk who are on secondment into those countries? What does that mean for our indigenous population? So it's a journey that we're on, and I'm totally thrilled that we are working with IBM and other organizations, because we can't solve this on our own.
Moraine, you're actually holding a copy of the thing, aren't you? Making it happen, making it real.
Yes, and Liz brought some, and they're outside
right.
for people,
So
and you can also download it, I think, in PDF, yes.
Mm. And the Declaration of Amsterdam, just tell us a little bit about that and whether what you see as important in it.
All 10 steps are important, I think, and just shortly to explain, it actually adds 2 steps which most businessmen don't like. First is adding measurements, setting targets and actually measuring progress or the current situation, etc. And the 10th different one is adding budget. And we said in this declaration, what if companies would spend €1 per employee per year on LGBT inclusion? And we thought it was about sufficient to get things going, to support some activities of the network, maybe, etc. So adding the interesting thing is, it actually started when we were organizing the Workplace Pride conference in the Netherlands, and we thought, hey, it would be great to do a press conference. But if you do a press conference, you have to actually define something new. And we thought, okay, what should we do? Why don't we do a declaration? And we got together with some people, and David was there. We got some advice, and we ran it through a couple of times. We wanted it to be a statement, but also to be practical, and to actually inspire people, but also define what some people's responsibilities were, including responsibilities of the LGBT community themselves, in actually being visible, in educating people, for example, and not just asking things of their employer, but get together. And we also realized that there's so much information already available of things that organizations, companies could do, how to build a business case. There's much information available. Look for it and look for ways that would work in your organization, and collaborate with institutions such as Workplace Pride or Stonewall, or there's a whole bunch of organizations, even smaller, even Diversity Pro in Slovakia, for example, in Poland, in Russia. There are organizations that can help you as well. So actually we defined those points, and then the next thing, actually, we invited the members of this organization to sign up to it. And you know, as soon as you ask some company to sign, then legal will get active and they say, okay, what's the implications? The biggest benefit of having them signing it was actually to start this conversation in their organizations and to have legal involved, to have the CEO involved. And they all showed up at a New Year's reception, and they were happy to sign first or second. They all wanted to sign at that point. And still, companies, organizations are signing up to that. So it's been quite effective.
I mean, look, I've got a copy of it here. You can download this thing, by the way, the Declaration of Amsterdam, and it is a good guide to what best practice or good practice would be in a company. Because to me, to be absolutely honest, although there are 10 points, there's one that is so important, and then some of the others, yeah. But number one is employers must provide a safe, comfortable, equal opportunity workplace and promote authenticity for LGBT employees. I mean, to me is 50%. And then you mentioned that there are obligations both sides. So number 4, this is the other way. LGBT employees should actively strive to be visible at work and collaborate with their employers on diversity and inclusion, leading the way for all employees. Mairead, there will be people who will say, that's too intrusive. You know, if people want to be in the closet for whatever reason, you know, it's not the job of anybody else to write down on a declaration which their employer signs saying you have a kind of an obligation to come out.
That's true, absolutely. And you can't really ask it of people, I think, because it's often a personal journey. And they might have reasons why they're not ready yet. But, and I've worked with some people in the board of larger corporations, at some point they probably are a role model whether they want it or not. So if a senior person is working in your organization and people would know that he or she is gay or lesbian and they're not talking about it, they would actually give like this message. It's okay in this company, you can even be a senior in this company, but don't talk about it. So it's important that they get vocal, really, because otherwise nothing else. But you can't demand it, but you can help them. And it really helps to get them in contact with peers in other organizations and explain the importance. But it also helps to get actually a non-LGBT people to speak up for them. To have a very senior or the executive actually just use the words lesbian and gay at times when he's talking about his organization development and what kind of organization it is. But it's also, I think, a discussion about inclusive leadership more and more. I mean, being authentic is one thing, but promoting others to be authentic as well, that's the inclusive leadership that companies need. And I think if you engage that conversation around it, people think, okay, yes, now we get it, and that encourages people probably to indeed make these statements and be more vocal about who they really are.
Any questions or points or thoughts? Yes, we've got one right at the back there, and microphone is just coming. If you can tell us who you are, it's always just good for us to know. Yeah, thanks.
Hello everyone. My name is Tibor Havlik. I'm from an NGO, Diversity Pro in Slovakia, and I work for one of the big 4 companies as well.
One of the accounting firms?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes. And actually my question would be for Liz. Sorry, Maren. You coming from that, that area, and I heard from companies, including my company in Slovakia, that, we are open, you can be yourself in work, but there is no need for special program or approach or anything or communication. And, I see that my company stands out globally, fighting for inclusion and stuff. They're number 7 on the list. You're number 4, I think. And, but locally there is nothing, none information, nothing at all. I see people closeted at work. I know that, it's their decision to come out or not. But still, you're talking about implementing inclusion globally, but what is the case, or how can we do it locally? Because this is what we are actually struggling with, especially in countries like Slovakia and maybe Serbia, where also the inclusion in society is not that strong.
That's a very good point, because actually it's okay to sort of sign a declaration or have a set of principles. Actually, just meeting them.
Yeah, and it's not an easy answer at all. But one of the things that we found is really impactful in some of our more difficult territories as well, is where we have been really obviously connecting with our clients in the local marketplace. Because that really encourages local leaders to wake up and kind of think, oh my goodness, this is an important topic. I need to get on this topic. You know, if Vodafone are coming into my office to talk about this, or Barclays or whoever it might be, then I need to get with the program. And we found that that's been very effective in encouraging local leadership to pay more attention to the agenda. And the other thing that we found to be very effective is getting senior LGBT leaders like myself, who are committed to role modeling and committed to the agenda, to come on a visit and to talk to local leadership. And our most senior out lesbian in the entire EY universe, Beth Brooke, who's based in DC, you know, she uses the term about normalizing. She said, you know, when I turn up at an office, you know, and I'm on the global executive and blah, 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 and people see that I'm not green and I haven't got two heads, you know, and I'm really good at my job, you know, and I get an audience with Hillary Clinton, you know, if I want to, then they kind of go, oh my goodness, and she happens to be a lesbian, you know, so there's a kind of a normalizing that senior leadership can play a really important part in.
Yes, and I would really like to add, I mean, Beth is fantastic as a person, but what we found at IBM is very effective. And for us, it might be a little bit easier because we're very top-down driven company, globally, strategy, policy-wise. But within our management teams, we have executive sponsors for each of the constituency groups. And we have that on all levels. We have it on the global level, on the regional level, and on the country level. So on each of those levels, we have an executive sponsor for the female community, from the generation, also the LGBT constituency group. We have 5 groups in diversity we focus on globally, so there's 5 in every board of the country. We struggle sometimes. In Russia, we didn't get an LGBT one yet, and the one in France got really negative comments personally on some websites of an extreme right organization. But that's the policy we have in IBM, and that really helps to drive the agenda. If those executive people adopt a topic, you know, they get to compete a little bit with their group is maybe doing a little bit better than the other group, etc. But you really embed this into your organizational structure, and it's very effective. So I would really recommend for organization, look at a global approach, and it taps into what Lord Brown says, create this infrastructure. If you do something like that, you're making sure that it actually, the policies including LGBT, together with the other diversity constituent groups, get really organized within your structure. So I would recommend starting with executive sponsors for each of the constituency groups in all of the countries, including on local level, including on the global level, where you have actually people defining the directions.
Interesting. Any more questions? I've got more if anyone doesn't have any, but if you do, I'll put mine. Marijn, you mentioned this issue. It's actually number 8 in the Amsterdam Declaration. Employees should develop and establish measurements that identify the level and progress of LGBT inclusiveness. It sounds so simple, but how the hell do you go about measuring or rating corporate performance in this regard?
Yeah. I can give the example of IBM, and it's actually quite an interesting topic in the last years. It's about self-identification. And you might struggle with your labor union, with privacy regulations, with the corporate council, maybe. But if you would do that voluntarily and indicate why it's so important and that you indeed protect this data, in IBM, we have this rolled out in several countries, and we have a roadmap to roll it out in next countries, even where in the first instance it was not adopted. It provides really good information, but there's other information as well, maybe people, the members of your networking group, etc. But in HR, you might have so much data on your employees, and you might like to add some diversity data to see how you can drive progress. And we argue that actually the self-identification of LGBT people is very
So
effective.
you just simply mean asking the staff, are you LGBT?
Yes.
And then keeping track of how many say yes.
Yes.
And does that measure inclusiveness?
Yes, I'd argue. My argument would be that the number of out LGBT people is actually the indicator of how inclusive your company is.
And I think if you measure other things as well, Evan, so you might measure promotions, performance ratings, attrition, all other indicators that will drive towards whether or not that group of self-identified people are being treated apparently fairly, and whether or not they're engaged. Because if you see a spike in attrition, then you can imply from that that they're not engaged. So you could also imply from that that you're not actually being inclusive.
So you mean to find out what the sexuality of your staff is, and then see whether there's a differential rate of attrition among gay and non-gay staff, for example, as a practical measure.
But it is really tricky to actually get the first data set.
The data set that goes out, the email that goes out and says, just by the way, let us know if you're gay.
And
Does that go down well? I mean, I don't know. You see, there are people who will say that's inappropriate as a...
My boss actually said to me a while ago, he said, there must be more like you. And I said, what? Aries? And he was meaning no lesbians. But, you don't go sort of hunting them out. But it is tricky. But, Marin's point about, explaining why this kind of data is important to us as an organization in order for us to hold ourselves to account on our inclusion journey is really important.
Is there a danger that if you ask in your declaration that employers should dedicate a minimum of €1 per employee per year, I mean, it's not a massive amount, let's be honest.
That's why we put it there, so we
Yeah,
thought they
would
would
be-
say yes.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I'm just slightly worried that you might find employers who say, look, I don't like number 9, where I have to pay €1, because I don't want to budget for this, but I'm happy to agree with all the other bits. Is that all right, or you just think you have to take all 10 points or not?
No, we see it more as a commitment and an intention. And it's an ongoing process. Liz mentioned that it's great to score high on the index or the Stonewall index, but it really is work in progress. You can't say, okay, I've reached this level, I'm done. You're never done in diversity. You always need to take steps and measurements and define just which ones work best in your organization. I would recommend also the Workplace Pride Benchmark, which is a very practical tool for companies.
What was that called again?
It's the Workplace Pride Benchmark.
Okay.
It's way easier than the Stonewall Index, takes way less time, but it's very much a practical insight of actually, and it was actually defined together with a whole big group of companies, including Sodexo, for example. But it's a survey, it's questions that define what you can do and also define how well you've actually done that. So it's measurements, and it sounds actually way more easy than it is to define it, but it's become a very practical tool for organizations. And the interesting thing about it is that the companies can participate in that, but then the results won't be published unless they like it, and I think the top 5 might be published. But it's a very beneficial tool of measuring actually what you've done and how good you've done it.
How many of you here have heard of the Amsterdam Declaration, out of interest? How many of you have not heard of the Amsterdam Declaration? Okay. How many of you are going to download it after this? No, that is the right answer. You should put your hand up for that. Yeah, no, it's just quite interesting. I mean, I think it's a tool and you could potentially download it and just show it to your employer if you're brave and say, hey, how about this? Would you sign it? Or I think it's a good way of starting the debate, and it's also a very good set of principles. Right, can we thank Liz and Marijn for that session?